I've spent enough years on this earth to know that most people don't run toward trouble. They run from it. But every now and then, you meet someone who runs towards something harder to name a second chance, maybe, or a place where nobody knows the weight they carry. Those are the ones worth watching. Those are the ones with stories that stay with you long after they're gone. The train lurched to a stop, and the woman's fingers went white around the handle of her suitcase. Dusty Creek. The sign hung crooked on a single nail. No platform. No station master. Just red dirt stretching toward a sky that didn't care who she was or where she came from. She stepped down alone. The locomotive hissed once behind her, then pulled away, leaving nothing but silence and the smell of coal smoke fading in the afternoon heat. A wagon appeared at the far end of the road. One horse, one man. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just sat there on the buckboard, watching her the way a man watches something he isn't sure he wants. Neither of them moved. And somewhere between that empty platform and that waiting wagon, a story began that neither of them expected. We love hearing where you're watching from. Drop a comment and let us know. If you've been enjoying these stories, we'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you more tales like this one. Note, beats 10 to 11 are CTA content and will not receive image prompts. Adjusting to 9-story beats. The kitchen smelled of old grease and something sour, like milk left too long in summer heat. Clara set her suitcase by the door and stood still, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light. Dust floated in the single shaft of sun coming through the window. Cobwebs stretched between the ceiling beams, thick and undisturbed. The basin sat full of dishes, brown water, flies circling lazy patterns above the rim. A cast iron stove squatted against the far wall. Its surface was coated in soot so thick it looked like black velvet. Clara crossed the room, ran a finger along the edge. The residue came away dense and greasy. She wiped it on her dress without thinking. Through the window, she could see Elijah leading the horse toward the barn. His shoulders moved with the slow rhythm of a man who had stopped hurrying years ago. He didn't look back at the house. Clara turned to face the kitchen. The flour barrel sat in the corner. She lifted the wooden lid, half full. Weevils floated on the surface, small and dark against the white. She blew them off. Scooped a handful of flour, let it sift through her fingers, gritty, but usable beneath the top layer. A tin of lard sat beside the stove. She pried the lid open with her thumbnail. The fat inside was solid, white, still good. The water pump groaned when she worked the handle, once, twice, 3 times. Brown sludge sputtered into the basin, splashing against the dirty dishes. She kept pumping. The water ran clearer on the 8th stroke, clearer still on the 12th. By the 15th, it came out almost clean. She found a rag under the sink, stiff, gray, forgotten. She plunged it into the water, wrung it out, and started on the stove. The soot came off in layers, streaking her forearms, working its way under her fingernails. Beneath the grime, the iron was still sound, still whole. The light through the window shifted from yellow to amber. Her shoulders ached. Her knuckles were raw where the rough cloth had scraped them. She did not stop. When she finally stepped back, the stove gleamed dull silver in the fading light. The basin was empty, scrubbed clean, drying upside down on the counter. She heard boots on the porch, heavy, slow. Elijah stood in the doorway. His eyes moved across the room, stove, the basin, the swept floor. Then they settled on her rolled sleeves, her loose hair, the smear of black across her cheek. He didn't speak, neither did she. He walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. The wood creaked under his weight. Clara turned back to the stove. She opened the firebox, laid kindling inside dry twigs she'd found stacked by the back door, and struck a match from the tin on the shelf. The sulfur flared bright. The flame caught, and somewhere in the silence between them, something else shifted too, something neither of them had words for. Not yet. Clara woke before the rooster. The room was black, the air still carrying the coolness of night. She lay on the narrow bed in the spare room, staring at a ceiling she couldn't see. The mattress beneath her smelled of dust and old hay, compressed by years of disuse. The quilt was thin, patched in places with uneven stitches. Someone had made it by hand, someone who wasn't here anymore. She rose, dressed in the dark, fingers finding buttons by memory, 6 steps down the hall, hand trailing along the left wall. Then the doorframe opened into the kitchen. The stove was cold. Gray ash sat in the firebox from the night before. She knelt on the rough floorboards, cleared the grate, and laid fresh kindling, small sticks first, then larger pieces from the pile she had noticed stacked by the back door. She struck a match. The sulfur smell bit at her nose. The flame caught, spreading orange light across her hands. By the time the sky outside turned from black to gray, she had biscuits in the oven. The flour had behaved the way flour should. The lard cut in clean, coating the grains without clumping. She worked the dough with the heels of her palms, pressing and folding, until it held together without crumbling. Her hands remembered even when her mind wandered to other places. Coffee boiled in the pot. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and dark, cutting through the lingering staleness. She heard him before she saw him. Boots on the porch. A pause, 1 beat, 2. Then the door swung open. Elijah stepped inside. He wore the same clothes as yesterday, cotton shirt gone soft from washing, canvas trousers, suspenders that had seen better years. His hat was already on, pulled low over his forehead. He stopped just past the threshold. The smell reached him. She watched his nostrils flare, saw his chin lift 1/2 inch. Clara said nothing. She pulled the biscuits from the oven, golden on top, cracked where the steam had escaped, heat rising in soft waves, and set the pan on the table. She poured coffee into a tin cup, placed it beside the pan. He looked at the food, then at her. "I can cook," she said. The words came out flat, not a boast, not a plea, just a fact. Laid beside the biscuits like another offering. Elijah pulled out a chair. The legs scraped against the floorboards. He sat. He picked up a biscuit, broke it in half. The inside was white and soft, still steaming. He bit into it, chewed, swallowed. Clara stood by the stove, hands clasped in front of her apron. She did not move. He reached for the second half, ate it, reached for another. "That'll do," he said. He didn't look at her when he said it. His eyes stayed on the plate, on his hands, on some middle distance only he could see. Clara exhaled. The breath left her slowly, carrying tension she hadn't known she was holding. She poured herself coffee, wrapped both hands around the cup, the heat seep into her palms. Outside, the sun crested the horizon. Light spilled through the window, catching dust motes suspended in the air, turning them gold. Neither of them spoke again. He finished 3 biscuits, drained the coffee, stood up, pushed the chair back, and put his hat on, though it had never truly come off. At the door, he paused. "Chicken coop out back," he said. "Hasn't been used in a while. Might still be eggs." Then he was gone. The door didn't slam. It closed soft, like he was trying not to disturb something he couldn't name. Clara stood alone in the kitchen. The light grew stronger, filling the room with pale gold. She looked at the empty plate, the crumbs, the ring of coffee where his cup had been. She washed the dishes, dried them, put them away in the cabinet above the basin. Then she walked to the back door, opened it, and stepped outside. The chicken coop sat 30 yards from the house, leaning slightly to the left where one post had rotted and settled. The wire fence sagged in places. Weeds grew thick around the base, brown and brittle in the morning sun. She walked toward it. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through the hem of her dress with each step. She didn't mind. The air smelled of sage and something faintly sweet, wildflowers maybe, growing somewhere out of sight. The coop door hung crooked on one hinge. She pulled it open. Inside, straw covered the floor in uneven clumps. Some rotted to dark mulch, some still pale yellow. 3 hens sat in the nesting boxes, feathers ruffled, watching her with flat black eyes. Clara reached beneath the first hen. The bird didn't move, just blinked slowly. Clara's fingers found warmth, then smoothness, an egg. She gathered 4 in total, cradled them in the fold of her apron, careful not to crack the shells. Walked back toward the house. At the kitchen door, she paused. On the table, next to where Elijah had sat, was a small wooden box she hadn't noticed before. The lid was open. Inside, a woman's handkerchief, white cotton, edged with lace, embroidered with tiny blue flowers, forget-me-nots. And beneath it, catching the light from the window, a gold ring, simple, plain, the kind a woman would wear every day of her married life. Clara set the eggs on the counter. Her hands trembled just slightly, just enough that she noticed. She didn't touch the box, but she couldn't stop looking at it either. Elijah hadn't mentioned a wife, but someone had lived here before. Someone who stitched quilts and embroidered flowers and wore a gold ring on her finger. And now that someone was gone, 4 weeks changed a kitchen. Herbs hung from the ceiling beams now, sage, thyme, rosemary tied with twine Clara had found in the barn, drying in the warm air that rose from the stove each morning. The cast iron pans gleamed on their hooks, seasoned dark with use. The flour barrel sat in its corner with a proper lid, weighted with a stone to keep out pests. Sunday afternoon. Late September light slanted through the window, catching steam that rose from the Dutch oven on the table. Beef stew, potatoes cut thick, carrots from the garden she'd found half dead behind the house and nursed back with water and patience. Onions from the root cellar, still firm despite the months of storage. 4 plates on the table, 4 cups, 4 sets of hands reaching for bread. Elijah sat at the head, in the chair that had always been his. To his left sat Hector, a quiet man, somewhere past 50. His face lined like dry creek beds, hands scarred from decades of rope and leather and hard work. To his right, Samuel, younger, maybe 25, dark hair curling at his collar, a smile that came easier than most things in this country. They had been working through the fall harvest. Elijah had explained it the week before, his words sparse as always, hands staying through October. They'll eat with us. Clara sat at the far end of the table, the seat closest to the stove. Samuel reached for the salt. Pass it down. She slid the small clay pot across the wood. Their fingers didn't touch. Hector tore a chunk of bread from the loaf, dipped it in the stew, and ate without looking up. He chewed slowly, methodically, the way a man chews who has learned that meals aren't guaranteed. Samuel took a second helping, then a third. Between bites, he glanced at Clara with open curiosity. My mother used to make stew like this, he said. Back home, in Sonora, same smell, same... He paused, gesturing vaguely with his spoon, searching for a word that wouldn't come. Same feeling. Clara looked at her plate. She didn't know what to say. Good food, Hector said. 2 words, more than he'd spoken all week combined. Elijah reached for the bread. His knuckles were cracked, the skin red and rough from work mending fences, moving cattle, all the tasks that never ended on a ranch this size. He broke the loaf in 2, set one half on his plate, passed the other to Samuel. Clara made it, he said. 3 words. Her name in his mouth. She felt the weight of it settle somewhere beneath her ribs, unfamiliar and warm. Samuel grinned. Well, Mrs. Tanner, if you ever tire of this place, my mother would fight you for the recipe. She can have it, Clara said. Nothing secret, just time and patience. Samuel laughed, a bright sound that seemed to fill corners of the room that had been quiet too long. Even Hector's mouth twitched upward for half a second before settling back into its usual flat line. Elijah didn't laugh, but he looked at her, just for a moment, just long enough that she noticed. The meal wound down slowly. Talk of weather, cattle prices, the fence posts that needed replacing on the north pasture before the rains came. Ordinary things. The kind of talk that happens when people share a table and a purpose, even if they don't share much else. Clara cleared the plates, scraped the bones into a bucket. There were no dogs anymore. Elijah had mentioned that once. 2 hounds gone 3 winters back, never replaced. She carried the dishes to the basin, pumped water, began to wash. Behind her, the men moved to the porch. Their voices drifted through the open window, low murmurs about the work ahead. The calves that would need branding come spring. A storm someone had heard was building to the west. She was elbow deep in soapy water when footsteps sounded behind her. Samuel stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, turning it by the brim. Need help? No, he didn't leave. He leaned against the door frame, watching her work. You're not from around here, he said. It wasn't a question. Clara scrubbed a plate, set it in the drying rack, picked up another. East, she said. East is big. It is. Samuel turned the hat another quarter rotation. You don't talk much, neither does he. She didn't need to say who. Samuel's eyes flicked toward the porch, then back to her. His expression shifted, something knowing, something careful. He used to talk more, Samuel said quietly. Before, Clara's hands stilled in the water. She didn't turn around. Before what? The silence stretched. Outside, Hector said something she couldn't hear, and Elijah's low voice answered. Before she died, Samuel's voice had dropped, almost to a whisper. His wife, 3 years back. Fever took her in the summer. Too fast for the doctor to get here. Gone in 5 days. The water dripped from Clara's fingers. She watched it fall, small splashes catching light. He doesn't talk about it, Samuel continued. But you see it sometimes in us, the way he looks at the house, like he's expecting someone who's never coming back. Clara picked up the plate, rinsed it, set it down. Why are you telling me this? Samuel put his hat back on, pulled the brim low over his eyes. Because you should know what you're walking into. He paused at the door. And because I think he needs someone to stay this time. He left. The screen door swung shut behind him, creaking on its hinges. Clara stood at the basin. The water had gone cold around her wrists. Outside, she could hear Hector's horse moving toward the barn, Samuel calling something in Spanish, the creak of saddle leather, and beneath it all, Elijah's silence, heavy as the hills. She dried her hands on her apron, walked to the table. The wooden box was still there. She hadn't moved it since that first morning, hadn't touched it. But she'd looked at it every day at the handkerchief folded neatly inside, the forget-me-nots stitched in blue thread, the gold ring that caught the light no matter where the sun sat in the sky. She reached out, her fingers brushed the lid, and then she heard it boots on the porch, heavier than Samuel's, slower than Hector's. Clara pulled her hand back, stepped away from the table. Elijah appeared in the doorway. His silhouette filled the frame, backlit by the last copper light of sunset. He looked at her, then at the box. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the weathered skin. That was hers, he said. Clara nodded. I know. 6 weeks since the train. Clara had stopped counting days, but her body remembered the change. Her shoulders no longer tensed at every creak of the floorboards. Her hands moved through the kitchen without hesitation, reaching for jars and utensils she now knew by touch. The rhythms of the house had become her rhythms, waking before dawn, sleeping after the last lamp was dimmed. Saturday, market day in Dusty Creek. The wagon rattled down the main street, Elijah holding the reins, Clara beside him on the bench seat. The road was packed dirt, rutted from summer storms and autumn rains. Buildings lined both sides, a general store with sun-bleached awnings, a post office no bigger than a tool shed, a church at the far end with white paint peeling from its steeple, maybe 30 structures in all, scattered along a single road that turned to mud whenever the weather changed. Elijah pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store. He climbed down, tied the horse to the post, and turned to help Clara. She was already on the ground. He paused, nodded once, said nothing. Inside, the store smelled of leather and tobacco and something sweet molasses. Maybe. Or the dried apples hanging in clusters from the rafters. Jars lined the shelves behind the counter, filled with hard candies and pickled vegetables and things Clara couldn't identify. Bolts of fabric stood upright in wooden crates near the window. A gray cat slept on a barrel of crackers, its tail twitching in some private dream. Clara moved through the aisles, gathering what she needed. Salt the kitchen was nearly out, sugar for the preserves she planned to make when the last apples ripened, a new bolt of calico, blue with small white flowers, thread to match. She set her items on the counter. The woman behind it studied her with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles, gray hair pulled back tight, face lined but strong. "You're the new one," the woman said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Tanner's wife." Clara hesitated. The words still felt borrowed, like a coat that didn't quite fit. "Yes." The woman's gaze moved over her, measuring, assessing. Not unkind, but thorough. "I'm Mrs. Porter. I run this store with my husband. He handles the feedlot next door." She began tallying the items, scratching numbers onto a slip of paper with a worn pencil. "You're the first woman at that ranch in 3 years." Clara said nothing. She watched the pencil move. Mrs. Porter glanced up. Folks talk. Small town. Not much else to occupy the mind. "You understand how it goes." "I imagine so." "They'll talk about you too, where you came from, why you're here, why a woman like you would answer an advertisement for a husband she'd never met." Mrs. Porter set down the pencil. Her eyes were steady. "I don't hold with gossip myself, but if I were in your shoes, I'd want to know what was being said." Clara's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. The wood was smooth, worn by years of hands just like hers. "What are they saying?" Mrs. Porter wrapped the calico in brown paper, tied it with string from a spool on the counter. "That you came from back east. That you don't talk about your family. That you showed up with one suitcase and no wedding dress." She pushed the package across the counter. "That maybe you're running from something." Clara picked up the package, held it against her chest. "Everyone's running from something," she said quietly. Mrs. Porter studied her for a long moment. Then something in the older woman's face shifted, not quite a smile, but close, an acknowledgement. "I suppose that's true enough." She turned back to her tallying. $4.20. Clara counted out coins from the small purse Elijah had pressed into her hand that morning. She hadn't asked where it came from. She hadn't wanted to know. She gathered her packages and walked toward the door. "Mrs. Tanner." Clara stopped, turned. Mrs. Porter was leaning forward on the counter, arms folded. "Whatever you're running from," she said, "it'll catch up, always does." Her voice was matter of fact, neither warning nor threat. "The question is whether you'll be ready when it does." Clara pushed through the door and stepped into the afternoon sun. Elijah was waiting by the wagon. He took the packages from her without a word, loaded them in the back, and offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. This time she took it. They were halfway down the main street when Clara saw him. Across the road, standing in the shadow of the post office awning, tall, black vest over a white shirt, flat-brimmed hat, the kind men wore in cities, not out here. His shoes were polished. She could see them catching light even from this distance. Wrong for this place, too fine for the dust. He was looking directly at her. Clara's breath caught. Her hands gripped the edge of the seat, knuckles going white against the weathered wood. Elijah glanced at her, followed her gaze across the street. "Someone you know." She shook her head. "Too fast, too sharp." "No." But the man didn't look away. He stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, watching the wagon pass. His face was in shadow beneath the hat brim, but Clara could feel his eyes on her patient. Certain, unhurried. The wagon turned the corner. He was gone. Elijah said nothing, but his jaw tightened, and he flicked the reins harder than necessary. The horse picked up speed. Clara stared straight ahead. Her pulse beat hard in her throat. Her palms were slick where they pressed against her skirt. She knew that stillness, that way of watching, that posture of a man who believed himself entitled to whatever he saw. She had seen it before, in a parlor back east, heavy with the smell of cigar smoke and old money. In the eyes of the man her father had chosen for her, the man she had left standing alone in a church full of guests, the man she had thought she'd outrun, 3 miles back to the ranch, 3 miles of open road and empty grassland and nothing but sky in every direction. Clara didn't look back, but she could still feel him, like a shadow she couldn't shake. And she knew with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in her stomach that he hadn't come all this way just to watch. 7 weeks. The mornings had found their rhythm now. Clara woke before dawn. Elijah's boots crossed the porch before the coffee finished boiling. They ate in a quiet that had grown familiar, comfortable, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. This morning was different. Elijah stood at the kitchen table, flour dusted across his forearms to the elbow, his large hands buried in a mound of dough that refused to hold together. Pieces crumbled away each time he pressed. The mass fell apart under his palms. Clara stood at the stove, watching. Something tugged at the corner of her mouth. She pressed it down. "You're working it too hard," she said. He looked up. A streak of white ran across his jaw, where he'd scratched an itch without thinking. "Keeps falling apart. Because you're fighting it." She wiped her hands on her apron, crossed to the table, and stood beside him, close enough to catch the smell of soap on his skin, the faint trace of leather from his work gloves hanging by the door. "Here, like this." She placed her hands over his fingers stilled beneath her palms, rough, calloused, twice the size of her own. "Warm, press," she said, gently, "then fold, then press again." She guided his hands through the motion. "Feel how it changes, how it starts to smooth." He didn't answer, but his hands moved, following hers, and the dough began to yield. "Slower," she said. "No need to rush." The dough came together, held its shape, became something that might actually rise. Clara stepped back. Her cheeks felt warm. "See?" Elijah looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else, then at her. "My mother tried to teach me this," he said, "years ago, before I left home. Never had the patience for it. You have it now." He shook his head slowly. "No, I just have a better teacher." The words hung in the air. Clara turned back to the stove, suddenly very interested in the coffee pot that didn't need checking. That afternoon, he came to find her. She was in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds from between the carrot rows, when his shadow fell across the dirt. "Come with me," he said. "Something I want to show you." They saddled the horses. Honey, the mare he'd given Clara 2 weeks prior, gentle and honey-colored as her name stood patient while Clara fumbled with the cinch. She'd never been much of a rider. Twice at a county fair as a child, on ponies led by handlers. Nothing like this. Elijah rode beside her on a gray mare with no name, keeping the pace slow, watching from the corner of his eye, ready to reach out if she started to slip. She didn't slip. The herd grazed in a wide valley 2 miles north of the house. 50 head. Maybe more, Clara couldn't count them accurately. The way they moved and merged and separated across the golden grass. A creek wound through the basin, catching light like a ribbon of silver. Elijah dismounted near a fallen log, helped her down. His hands rested at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "This is it," he said. "Everything I have." Clara looked out at the cattle, the grass, the endless sky. "It's beautiful. It's hard." He walked to the log, sat down, gestured for her to join him. Work never stops. Summer's branding, fall's driving them to market, winter's keeping them alive when the snow piles higher than the fences. He paused. Spring's burying the ones that didn't make it. Clara sat beside him. The bark was rough beneath her skirt, peeling in long strips. "Why do you stay?" He was quiet for a long moment. His eyes tracked a hawk circling high above, riding currents of warm air. Because she loved it here. Clara didn't need to ask who. "Margaret grew up in Philadelphia," he continued, his voice low and even. "Never saw a cow until she was 20 years old. But she came out here with me, and she—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "She saw something I couldn't see. Beauty where I only saw work. Purpose where I only saw survival." What happened? The question was out before Clara could stop it. She tensed, waiting for him to stand up, walk away, shut the door that had briefly opened. He didn't. Fever. The word came out flat. Summer of '79. Started with a headache on a Monday. By Thursday, she couldn't stand. By Saturday, his jaw worked, muscles tight beneath the skin. Doctor was 40 miles away. I rode through the night to fetch him. When we got back Sunday morning, she was already cold. Clara's hands were clasped tight in her lap. She wanted to reach out, touch his arm, his hand, something, but she didn't move. "I'm sorry," she said. He shook his head. "Don't be. She wouldn't want that." He turned to look at her. Really look, for the first time since they'd sat down. "She'd want me to keep going, find someone else. Stop living in a house that feels like a grave." Clara held his gaze. The wind moved through the grass, bending it in slow waves. "Is that why you sent for me?" "Partly." He looked away, back toward the cattle. "Partly because I was tired. Tired of bad cooking and silent meals. Tired of waking up in rooms that still smell like her, even though she's been gone 3 years. And now..." He didn't answer right away. The hawk had drifted out of sight, lost behind a ridge to the east. "Now I wake up and smell coffee," he said quietly. "Biscuits. Something else I can't name. Something that makes me want to get out of bed." Clara's throat tightened. She looked down at her hands. "I'm not her," she said. "I can never be her." "I know. I have my own..." She stopped, started again. "Things I don't talk about either. I know that too." He stood, extended his hand. She took it. They rode back as the sun sank toward the horizon, shadows stretching long across the grass. Elijah pointed out landmarks as they went: the old oak where he'd proposed to Margaret, the creek bend where they'd picnicked on summer evenings, the hill where she was buried. He didn't take Clara there. Not yet, but he told her about it. And somehow, that felt like enough. At the house, he helped her down from Honey. His hands stayed at her waist again longer this time. She didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For telling me." He nodded. Let her go. stepped back. "There's something else," he said. "Something I should have given you before." Clara's stomach tightened. "What?" He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper creased and soft, like it had been handled many times. "This came 3 days ago," he said. "I didn't know how to give it to you." She took the paper, unfolded it. A single line of handwriting. Elegant, precise, familiar in a way that made her blood run cold. "I know where you are. I am coming." No signature. Clara didn't need one. She knew that handwriting. Had seen it on dozens of letters she'd never answered. On a marriage contract she'd never signed. The man in the black vest hadn't just been watching. He'd already found her. Monday morning. Clara stood at the basin, scrubbing a pot that didn't need scrubbing. Through the window, she could see the road, the long ribbon of dirt stretching toward town, empty except for heat shimmer and dust, until it wasn't. A rider appeared, single horse, moving fast. Not Elijah, he'd left before dawn to check on the north pasture. Not Hector or Samuel, they rode together. Always. This horse was unfamiliar. Rented, maybe, from the livery in town, and the man on its back. Clara's breath stopped. She knew that silhouette, the rigid posture, the hat tilted just so. She set the pot down, gripped the edge of the counter. Her knuckles went white against the wood. He rode up to the house like he owned it, dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had never worked a day with his hands, walked toward the door, adjusting his cuffs, smoothing his vest, black vest, white shirt. Just like before. "Clara," his voice carried through the screen door, smooth as oil on water. "It's been a long time." She didn't open the door. "Richard?" He smiled the same smile that had charmed her father, impressed the society matrons, fooled everyone who didn't look close enough to see what lay beneath. "We need to talk. You know we do." "There's nothing to talk about. Isn't there?" He stepped closer to the screen, close enough that she could see the pores in his skin, the slight redness in his eyes that suggested a sleepless night. "You left me standing at the altar, in front of 300 guests, my family, your father's business associates." His voice hardened. "Do you have any idea what that did to my reputation?" "I don't care about your reputation. You should." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded paper. "This is the engagement contract your father signed. Legally binding. If you don't come back with me, I'm not going anywhere with you." Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. Richard laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. "You think you can just hide out here in the middle of nowhere, pretend to be some rancher's wife?" "She is a rancher's wife." The voice came from behind Richard, low, calm, dangerous in its quietness. Richard turned. Elijah stood at the corner of the house, 10 feet away. He must have ridden in from the north pasture, approached on foot, silent as the land itself. He wasn't holding a weapon, didn't need to. The set of his shoulders, the stillness in his stance, everything about him said he could handle whatever came next. "And you are?" Richard's voice had gone tight, defensive. "Elijah Tanner." He didn't offer his hand, didn't move. "This is my land. That's my wife. You're not welcome here." Richard's jaw worked. He looked at Clara, then back at Elijah. "You don't understand," he said. "She was promised to me. Her father and I. Her father isn't here." Elijah took one step forward. Just one. But it was enough to make Richard shift backward. She is, and she says she's not going with you. The contract, did she sign it? Richard hesitated. Her father, did she sign it? No, but then it's not binding. Elijah's voice was flat, final. Whatever deal you made was with a man who doesn't own her. Never did. Richard's face colored, heat rising in his cheeks. You don't know who she is, what she is. She didn't tell you everything. Does anyone? The question hung in the air. Simple, devastating. Clara stepped onto the porch. Her legs felt unsteady, but she kept her voice even. He's right, she said. I didn't tell you everything. Elijah looked at her. Waited. The night before the wedding, Clara continued, her eyes on Richard. He came to my room, uninvited, drunk. Her voice didn't waver. He told me what he expected from a wife, what he would do if I didn't comply, how no one would believe me if I tried to tell them. Richard's face went pale. That's not, it is. Clara's chin lifted. I ran because I had no choice, because staying meant belonging to a man who saw me as property, as something to be owned. Richard took a step toward her. You lying. Elijah moved. Faster than Richard expected. In 2 strides, he was between Clara and the other man, blocking the path. You heard her, he said quietly. Now you have a choice. Leave on that horse, or don't leave at all. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the yard. A hawk circled somewhere overhead. Richard's eyes flicked between them, calculating, measuring, looking for weakness. He didn't find any. This isn't over, he said finally. I have resources, connections. I can make things very difficult for both of you. Maybe, Elijah said, but you'll have to do it from somewhere else, because if you come back here again. He let the sentence hang, unfinished, more threatening for what it didn't say. Richard backed toward his horse, slowly, never turning his back on them. You'll regret this, he said to Clara. Both of you will. He mounted, wheeled the horse around, rode back down the long dirt road, dust rising behind him like a curtain falling on an act. Clara watched until he was just a speck on the horizon. Then she turned to Elijah. I should leave, she said. He'll come back. He'll make trouble. I can't. Do you want to leave? The question stopped her. No, she whispered. I've been running for so long. I'm tired of running. Elijah nodded, reached out, took her hand in his rough palm against soft, calluses against smoothness. Then stop. She looked at him. At this man who had asked no questions when she arrived, demanded no explanations, offered no judgments. Who had let her be exactly who she was, no more, no less. He won't touch you, Elijah said quietly. Not ever, not while I'm breathing, and for the first time in longer than she could remember. Clara believed someone who made her a promise. 1 week passed. Richard didn't return. Clara watched the road each morning, not with fear anymore, but with a kind of wary vigilance. Each day, the horizon stayed empty. A little more of the tension unwound from her shoulders. By Friday, she realized she'd stopped flinching at the sound of hoofbeats. By Saturday, she let herself breathe. Sunday morning, she stood in front of the small mirror in her room and smoothed the front of her dress. Blue calico, the fabric she'd bought at Mrs. Porter's store, sewn by her own hands in the evenings after supper, Simple, neat. The dress of a woman who belonged here. They rode to church together. The wagon creaked beneath them, wheels turning slow over packed dirt. Elijah didn't speak, but his silence was different now, not a wall, but a door left open. His hand rested near hers on the bench seat. The church sat at the edge of town, white paint peeling from its steeple. A dozen families had already gathered outside, horses tied to posts, children chasing each other around the oak tree in the yard. Heads turned as Elijah's wagon pulled up. Clara climbed down before he could help her, straightened her shoulders, walked toward the church doors. The whispers started before she reached the steps. She caught fragments. That's her. Ran from back east. Heard she left a man at the altar and kept walking. Her chin stayed level. Her eyes stayed forward. Elijah walked beside her, didn't touch her, but stayed close enough that she could feel his presence like a shield. Inside, the whispers didn't stop. They settled into the corners, hummed beneath the hymns, passed like notes between the wives in their Sunday best. Clara sat in the pew, hands folded in her lap, and endured. Then Mrs. Jennings rose, not for the hymn that was starting. She simply stood up in her pew, third row from the front, where everyone could see her, and turned to face the congregation. "I've heard what you've all been saying," she said. Her voice carried clear and sharp across the silent church. About Mrs. Tanner, about where she came from, about what she might have done. The whispers stopped. Every eye in the room turned toward her. "Shame on you." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't known Mrs. Jennings was watching, hadn't realized anyone was paying attention beyond the gossip. After the service, families approached the Tanners, not all of them, but enough. Hands were offered, names were exchanged. One woman, gray-haired and kind-eyed, pressed a jar of preserves into Clara's hands and said, "Welcome to Dusty Creek, dear. It's about time Elijah had someone to look after." The conversations were brief, careful, testing the waters, but they were real. And when Elijah suggested folks come back to the ranch for Sunday dinner, "Clara's been cooking enough to feed an army," 3 families accepted. Clara's heart pounded as she climbed back into the wagon. But this time, it wasn't fear. The afternoon unfolded like a dream. Wagons arrived at the ranch house, families piling out, children scattering across the yard. Clara had spent the night before preparing stews and biscuits and pies, more food than she'd made since arriving. Now it covered every surface of the kitchen table. Tables were set up outside, under the shade of the old oak. Plates passed from hand to hand. Laughter rose up, actual laughter. The sound of it strange and wonderful after so many quiet weeks. The children played tag around the chicken coop while their mothers sat together, talking about nothing and everything. Mrs. Jennings found Clara in the kitchen doorway, watching. "You didn't have to do that," Clara said quietly. "In church. Speak up for me." Mrs. Jennings stood beside her, arms crossed, watching the gathering. "Yes, I did," she said. "I've lived in this town 32 years. I know what it's like to be judged by whispers instead of actions. And I know what I see when I look at you and Elijah. What do you see? 2 people trying to make something work." She turned to look at Clara. "That's all any of us can do." Clara smiled a real smile, the kind that came from somewhere deep. "I should tell you something," Mrs. Jennings said, her voice dropping, "about the man who came looking for you Clara's smile faded. Richard. He spent 3 days at the saloon after Elijah sent him away, drinking, getting louder, making threats. Clara's stomach tightened. What happened? He got drunk enough to start talking about what he'd do when he got you back. Mrs. Jennings's jaw set hard. About how he'd make you pay for embarrassing him. How a wife needs to learn her place. She paused. Some of the men didn't take kindly to that. Clara's hands trembled. And they ran him out. Mrs. Jennings's eyes were steady. Told him if he came back, he'd leave on a rail instead of a horse. Last I heard, he caught the stage back to St. Louis, left his rented horse at the livery and didn't bother to pay the bill. Clara stared at her. The words didn't feel real. It's over. It's over. Mrs. Jennings patted her arm. Some men are all bluster. Others have the sense to know when they're beaten. That evening, after the guests had gone and the dishes were washed and the house had settled into its familiar quiet, Elijah handed Clara a telegram. "This came yesterday," he said. "I didn't want to give it to you before, not with everything else." She unfolded the paper. "Your father died. Funeral was Thursday. Estate goes to cousins. You are not mentioned in the will." The words blurred. Clara read them again and again. She waited for grief to come, for the tears she thought she should feel, for the weight of loss that daughters are supposed to carry. Nothing came. Clara, Elijah's voice, soft in the lamplight. She looked up at him, set the telegram down. "I'm all right," she said, and for the first time in her life, leaving those words unsaid, she realized she meant them. "Stay with me," she asked quietly. He didn't answer with words, just pulled a chair closer, sat down beside her, and stayed. 3 months since the telegram, Clara stood in the kitchen, morning light streaming through the window she'd cleaned so many times she could see her reflection in the glass. The stove radiated heat. Coffee steamed in the pot. Biscuits cooled on the wire rack golden, split at the tops. The way Elijah liked them. She hadn't gone back to St. Louis for the funeral. A letter from the family lawyer had arrived 2 weeks after the telegram formal. Cold, informing her that her father had left everything to distant cousins. The Ashworth engagement contract was void. Richard had returned to his family's business, apparently unwilling to pursue a woman who no longer came with money attached. Clara had burned the letter in the stove and watched the paper curl into ash. Now she stood at the counter, writing in the leather-bound cookbook she'd found in a drawer, not copying recipes, creating them. Her own measurements, her own adjustments, her own name at the top of each page. Clara Tanner, Dusty Creek, 1882. The screen door creaked. Elijah stepped inside, hat in hand, dirt on his boots from the morning's work. He'd been up since before dawn, mending fence posts on the north pasture. His face was weathered, lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. He looked at the table, set for two. Blue and white china, a gift from Mrs. Jennings. Delivered 3 weeks ago with no explanation needed. Fresh wildflowers in a mason jar, purple and yellow, picked from the field behind the house. "What's all this breakfast?" He raised an eyebrow. "Special breakfast. What's the occasion?" Clara set down her pencil, wiped her hands on her apron. 3 months, she said, since the telegram, since I decided to stay. Elijah hung his hat on the peg by the door, crossed to the table, sat down in his usual chair. "You've been counting. I count everything. Days, eggs, fence posts. She paused. How many times you smile? Something shifted in his face. How many is that more than before? He looked at her across the table, not assessing, not waiting, just seeing. You've changed things, he said. The kitchen, everything. Clara reached across the table. Her fingers brushed his knuckles, rough and cracked from work. I have something to tell you, she said. His hand stilled beneath hers. I'm not going anywhere, she added quickly. It's not bad. At least, I don't think it's bad. She took a breath, let it out slowly. I went to see Dr. Patterson in town last week, while you were at the cattle auction. Elijah's face went very still, and Clara lifted her eyes to meet his. I'm going to have a baby. The words hung in the air between them. The stove ticked. The coffee steamed. Outside, a meadowlark sang its morning song. Elijah didn't move. Say something, Clara whispered. He stood up, walked around the table, knelt beside her chair. His hands, those rough, working hands, cupped her face with a gentleness she hadn't known they possessed. A baby, he said. Yes, our baby, yes. He pressed his forehead to hers. His eyes closed. His breath came uneven. I thought. His voice caught. He cleared his throat, tried again. I thought that part of my life was over. After Margaret, after she... He couldn't finish. Clara put her hands over his. I know. I wanted children. She wanted children. We tried for 3 years. And then she was gone. And I thought I'd missed my chance. Thought maybe I wasn't meant to. Stop. He opened his eyes. You were meant for this, Clara said. For all of it. Family, children, a house that feels like a home instead of a grave. So were you, she smiled, the first real smile she'd felt in weeks. Then I suppose we both got what we needed. He kissed her, soft, slow, the taste of coffee and morning and something new. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. I need to build a cradle, he said. Clara laughed, a sound that surprised her, bubbling up from somewhere deep. You have time, and a proper rocking chair, not that broken thing on the porch, and the spare room needs paint, and we need blankets. She put a finger to his lips. Eat your breakfast first. He stared at her. Then he laughed, too rusty, unpracticed, like a door opening after years of rust. They ate together, biscuits and eggs and bacon, coffee with cream, the morning light growing stronger, filling the kitchen with gold. After breakfast, they walked outside. The ranch spread before them, the barn, the pastures, the cattle grazing in the distance. The sky was clear and endless. The kind of sky that made promises it might actually keep. Clara leaned against the porch railing. Elijah stood beside her, his arm around her waist. I want to plant something, she said. What? A tree. She pointed to a spot near the fence line where the ground dipped, where water would collect in spring. An apple tree. It won't bear fruit for years, but I want to plant it anyway. Why? She turned to look at him. Because I want to watch it grow. I want our child to climb it someday. I want, she paused. I want proof that I'm staying, that this is real. Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll dig the hole this afternoon. Today. They walked to the barn together, found shovels, carried them to the spot by the fence. The ground was hard, baked by months of sun. Clara's arms burned with each thrust of the shovel. Sweat ran down her back, soaking through her dress. Dirt worked its way under her fingernails. She didn't stop. Elijah worked beside her, silent and steady. Their shovels rose and fell in rhythm, a pattern, a conversation without words. By noon, the hole was ready. Clara walked to the wagon, where a small burlap-wrapped bundle waited. She'd bought the sapling in town 3 weeks ago, kept it watered behind the house, waiting for the right moment. She carried it to the hole, knelt down, unwrapped the burlap, revealing pale roots and a slender trunk reaching upward. She placed it in the earth. Elijah knelt beside her. Together, they pushed the dirt back in, patting it firm around the base. Clara sat back, looked at what they'd done. A tree, small, fragile, barely taller than her forearm, but alive, growing, reaching toward the sun. 5 years, Elijah said, maybe 6, before it bears fruit. I know, we'll be here to see it. She looked at him, at the man who had answered an advertisement for a wife, who had asked no questions, who had said, "That'll do," when she offered him nothing but a skill and a simple truth. "Yes," she said, "we will." She stood, brushed dirt from her skirt, reached down and pulled him to his feet. They walked back to the house together, hand in hand. The sun was high now, the air warm with the promise of afternoon. The kitchen would be cool, and there was dinner to prepare, and tomorrow there would be breakfast again, and the day after that. At the door, Clara paused, looked back at the tiny tree, silhouetted against the endless sky. She thought of the woman who had stepped off a train 3 months ago with nothing but a suitcase and a single sentence. The woman who had expected nothing, hoped for nothing, believed in nothing except her own ability to survive. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who planted trees and wrote recipes and carried a child beneath her heart, someone who had found home not in a building, but in a choice, not in a place, but in a belonging. She turned and walked inside, where the stove was warm and the coffee was waiting, and the rest of her life was just beginning. Outside, the apple tree swayed in the afternoon breeze, small, patient, growing toward a future neither of them could see, but both believed in. And for now, that was enough. That was everything.